friendships end. So go ahead and type in your chat box either to everyone or to Delia Hagen Mentor some reasons why you think friendships might end. And we'll give you a few minutes to do that.
Thanks, Jean. We're actually already getting some responses here in the chat box. The first thing is trust, just a one-word answer that captures a lot. The other responses I'm seeing are, again, a break in trust, so that's a big one. Other ones, one friend moves away, just growing apart. There might be a misunderstanding, or maybe the friendship feels one-sided are some of the things we're seeing.
Okay, those are all good reasons.
Lack of communication was also just typed in there as well.
Okay. So this actually, we could turn this into counseling in the dating relationships as well, because it really talks about how two people can break apart and seemingly well-intentioned people. So let's address a little bit about that. What are some of the things that we can do to help address some of these challenges that come up? And I think the first thing that we want to say is, in our job as mentoring program coordinators, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can so that the mentor is always seen by the mentee as someone that they can trust. And that extends through everything that they're doing together. So from something as simple as I'm a mentee and I tell you that my mother is the meanest mother in New York, and you don't call my mother up and say, hey, I hear you're really mean. And of course, just so you guys know, I am the meanest mother in New York. I have that from good authority from my son when he was 13. But the fact is, something as simple as that up to something as complicated as when a mentor has to seek additional help for a child. How do they do that in a way that doesn't break trust? That's a really important suggestion. Trust can also be something as simple as taking me seriously when I bring a problem to you, when I share something. Mentor doesn't minimize it, saying, oh, that's not important, you'll get over it. I can't tell you how many times I've heard parents say to a kid, oh, it doesn't matter that that girl or boy doesn't like you anymore. There are plenty of fish in the sea. Just not taking a young person's needs and wants seriously is a break in trust. They've shared something with you. Lack of communication, again, that's something that is critical to a good relationship, and many times we need work. And the mentors don't always come equipped to do that. It may be the case for mentors they haven't worked with a teenager in many years. They don't have children of their own, or their children are all grown, and they might need to have help understanding how to make that communication clear. And it's pretty easy to see, and if you think about times in your own relationships where you thought you were making yourself very clear and the other person you're communicating with turned up at the wrong place or called you at the wrong time because there was miscommunication. It wasn't intentional, but that can happen. Somebody moves away. That's a case where we can't have physical communication meetings if someone's moved away, but what can coordinators do to help close a match and have appropriate closure so it celebrates the trust, the relationship, the power that was in there, and encourages the young person that they've made a great accomplishment in forming this relationship, and encourages them to think about what other kinds of people they want to have in their lives. Another thing that we often hear from mentors about why they think the relationship should probably end is they feel as if they're not making a difference. And I don't know if those of you who are listening have had that experience where a mentor says to you, well, I don't think it matters if I'm there or not. I don't think she really cares if I show up or not. And that's really Your job as a coordinator is to help them understand how powerful the relationship is, even if the young person doesn't begin to know how to articulate that. So that's another job for the coordinator to help the mentor and the mentee to go forward. So those are all really good reasons why relationships and friendships might end. But if you step back and think about them, almost all of them have a way to mitigate, to continue the relationship, with perhaps the exception being when someone moves away, but even then you can have closure so that it ends in a very powerful and positive way. Okay? So let's keep that in mind as we look at some of the other things we're going to talk about today. Okay, next.
Come on in. So as we dive into this work talking about match support, it's important to note that this work is grounded in best practices, and specifically the elements of effective practice for mentoring. Mentor's cornerstone publication, The Elements of Effective Practice, details both research-informed and practitioner-approved standards for creating and sustaining quality youth mentoring programs and quality youth mentoring relationships, and consequently makes relationships more impactful. The fourth edition of the EEP was released in September 2015, and so it is a very up-to-date version of the latest research practice and thinking in the mentoring field. There are 6 evidence-based standards within the elements of effective practice, and they're really intended to be applicable across all different mentoring program types, so whether a program is community-based or school-based or group or one-on-one. Each standard includes benchmark standards to include safety and effectiveness of mentoring relationships, as well as enhancements that may be promising innovations useful for the field to keep an eye on. Additionally, there's a program planning and management section within the EEP that offers recommendations for designing, building, and strengthening mentoring programs and services. The Elements is really the backbone of the technical assistance and training that is provided by Mentor and our network of affiliates across the country. Many schools and districts have engaged with our network through the National Center to receive training and technical assistance on one or more of these topics. Many schools and districts we've been serving have been focused on mentor recruitment, screening, and training, which are extremely important parts of program management, and they must occur before the matching and initiation takes place. However, today we're really focusing on the monitoring and support of the mentor matches themselves. We know many matches will falter unless someone is paying attention to them, helping them develop and grow in the right direction. And we want to emphasize that each and every one of these elements is essential for mentoring programs to consider and plan around. This is just one of a series of webinars that the Center is hosting on mentoring-related topics. A webinar on matching and initiation of new mentoring relationships broadcasted, I believe, yesterday, and is now available on the NSA ESD website. And we also recommend you visit mentoring.org to download a full version of the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring and take advantage of some of the additional resources and support that provides. Next slide.
So I get to talk to you a little bit about different school-based mentoring approaches. And as you heard, I've been doing this for a long time, and many years ago we started instituting mentoring programs directly in schools, school-based mentoring, and focused them on the more traditional mentoring models that you might imagine existed many years ago, with the only differential being they took place in the schools. And so students were matched one-on-one with a mentor. They met once a week, and the mentor developed a relationship with the student just like in a more traditional one-to-one model that would take place outside the school setting. Those models are very effective, and many schools continue with them very successfully, targeting children for whom that additional caring adult who is available on a consistent basis is a really an important addition to their school work, to their encouragement of staying in school and being engaged by school. But one of the things they've studied, and we here at Mentor New York were lucky enough to be part of that, beginning it 7 years ago, they started a task force to fight chronic absenteeism here in the New York City schools. And they worked with Dr. Bob Balfance from Every Student Every Day, Everyone Graduates, to evaluate the effectiveness of this task force on chronic absenteeism. And what they found after the first 3 years of the pilot, studying really thousands of students and the work, is the most effective piece in fighting chronic absenteeism were the success mentors. And so we here in New York City and as well across the country have been promoting the work of success mentors to help students improve their attendance and therefore be in school more for better learning and for better connections. So what's the difference between the success mentor model and the traditional model? Well, in a traditional model, there's an expectation that the student is there most days, and so when the mentor plans to come in on a Thursday afternoon to meet with the student will be there. In success mentors, since it's focusing on attendance and they're working with children whose attendance is not what it should be or not what they hope for, it employs a different strategy, which is more frequent light touches between the mentor and the student. So it's those frequent interactions gives an opportunity for the mentor to be present almost every time the student appears in school and reinforces how glad they are to be in school. I'm glad to see them every day is a great celebration that you're here. I'm glad you're here. It matters to us whether or not you're coming. This process is really a process of strengths-based focus. You're in school, and we're going to honor that you've made that commitment, you're here, and we're going to keep moving it ahead as a positive so that we can build upon that to encourage students to be coming to school more and more. And in fact, we like to describe this as the parallel process for people who are coordinators to keep encouraging mentors with the same kind of strengths-based focus and language that we hope that they'll use for students. So it might be discouraging for a mentor to see that a student who was coming to school 2 days a week is now coming to school 3 days a week. The mentor might say to himself or herself, but they're only coming to school 3 days a week. And what a coordinator who's smart and well-versed in strength-based language will reframe that and say, oh my goodness, you've improved attendance for that student 50%. That's awesome. He's going to learn 50% more because he's in the building, in his classroom with his teachers. So that positive strength-based language, frequent interactions are very important in the Success Mentors model. The final note to think about in creating this particular model of Success Mentors, it builds on the natural connections that already exist in schools and proximity. Most of the people who are working in schools did not take the job that they did because there's a lot of glamour and paparazzi and money in being in a school building, whether as a teacher, a custodian, a paraprofessional. Generally, there's an interest in children, and they were glad to be there. So what happens, we find, is that many professionals in the school building already have natural connections with young people. Maybe it's a teacher who had a student the prior year and the student comes back to chat. Maybe it's a security guard who signs a student in every day when he's late. Maybe it's the administrative assistant who works in the nurse's office when a young girl goes down to take her allergy medicine. Those people are natural mentors in the child's life. And building upon those connections that already exist, those people can be trained to add a strength-based focus and an encouragement to continue to support the students' improved attendance and improved engagement in school. The way we conduct support on matches is going to be different depending on what kinds of mentors you have and what kind of model you're going to use. So can we go to the next slide?
So as Jean said, when we think about school-based mentoring, we acknowledge that there are different types of mentors that you're going to utilize for your program, and we also want to underline that the way that you support them will be different. Many sites leverage internal mentors, so people who are in the building regularly, staff of the school, members of a service corps like City Year or AmeriCorps, PTA members, those types of individuals. And then other sites use external mentors who are outside of the building and really come in only to mentor. So as you can imagine, the knowledge base that these individuals have about the school protocols, about the students within the school, the individuals who work within the building will be a completely different knowledge base. And you want to tailor the support that you provide those individuals around what their knowledge base is. You also have to remember that the access that these individuals, internal and external mentors, will have to data will be different. And so for a model like Success Mentors that's heavily focused around promoting a positive school attendance message and really understanding where students are at with their attendance patterns is critical for that mentoring role to really be successful. And if you have individuals who are external to the building that are serving that role, you need to make sure that they have access to that information in a way that's appropriate and protects privacy, but gets them the information that they need in order to be an effective mentor. We're not going to talk about peer mentoring today. It is a model that's been leveraged within this realm, but the programming and support around that is really different, and so today we're focusing mostly on adult to youth mentors. Next slide. So when we talk about why match support is important, you know, it's really probably the most critical piece in building and maintaining strong mentoring relationships. And as Jean said, it's really where the rubber meets the road. And the difference between a good program and an okay program is how they do match support. So we're going to talk about a little bit of research here. According to It's Not What I Expected, which is a qualitative study of youth mentoring relationship failures by Dr. Renee Spencer, inadequate support was one of the top reasons that mentoring matches closed prematurely. Research also supports that the longer and stronger a mentoring relationship, the more benefit there is to a youth. And conversely, when a match closes prematurely, it can actually damage a youth more than if they had never had a mentor at all. And so it's important to consider that, you know, we're not just building a mentoring relationship for the benefit of the youth, but if that match ends prematurely, we could potentially, you know, really be harming that young person and their perspective on adults, and many of these youth have already been let down by adults in their life, making the role of providing match support even more important. According to research from Herrera, Grossman, Cow, Feldman, and McMakin in 2007, only half of mentees in a school-based mentoring program continued the following year, and the average match length for the school-based mentoring program was 5 months, which is much less than what we hope to see, which is a 1 year, either calendar or school year time commitment. And in addition to relationship development, match support is an essential part of making sure relationships are safe and that appropriate boundaries are being respected. It's a way of continuing your screening process as a mentoring program. I talk to a lot of mentoring programs in our community about screening, and I say really the screening process doesn't even start until the mentor is matched with a mentee in the program. But we won't be talking about the specifics of screening on this webinar. However, we encourage you to, again, go to mentoring.org and check out the awesome resources listed, including the elements of effective practice for more guidance around this. Just remember that match support is about getting accurate, open-ended responses from youth mentors and ideally even the parents, so that you can ensure that the relationships are safe, that boundaries are being respected, but also that those relationships are developing in an effective and meaningful manner. And kind of like Jean said in the Icebreaker, that match support is also a way to reframe challenges and really model strengths-based perspectives for volunteers. Some of these individuals may not have a history of working with youth, and if a youth shows disinterest in the meeting time that they're spending together, it may cause the relationship to derail quickly, but you as a match support person can really intervene and provide support to both that mentor and mentee to ensure them that their relationship is developing on track. And really proper match support should carry throughout the length of a mentoring relationship, but it might be more intensive at the beginning and frequent, and that will lessen over time as the relationship takes off. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to give you an example of a session that I did. We often do a feedback session for mentoring programs where we go in and help the coordinator bring mentors together to talk about their challenges. But we don't tell them that that's what we're going to talk about. We ask them, how's everything going? And this was a real example several years ago of a group of corporate mentors who had partnered with an elementary school, so they were mentoring 3rd and 4th graders. I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you the story because it's such a good example of really being able to reframe and help mentors stay connected. So I asked this group of 12 mentors if they had any challenges, and they all said no, collectively that everything was fine. So since I had another hour to fill, I said, okay, so now I'm going to ask you to tell me one thing that surprised you as you began your mentoring relationships. And so the first person said, well, it really surprised me how polite the children are. Another person said, I was surprised to see how excited she was to see me. And then the third person said, well, actually I was surprised to find out that my little boy's mother has stage 4 breast cancer, and she's probably not going to live past a year. So I was taken aback, and we talked about that a little bit, what she had done, which was not tell anybody about it, and we talked about connecting her with the school social worker, and so she could get help and understand what kind of help the little boy and his family were getting, and then we moved on. So another person said, you know, what surprised me was how open my child was to talking to me. And then we got to another person who said, well, I was surprised because I sort of got into trouble about religion. I know you told me in the initial training don't talk about religion, but I inadvertently stumbled into it because my little girl told me that it was going to be her birthday, and no one would wish her a happy birthday. She wouldn't get a present. She wouldn't get a card. No one would say happy birthday to her. So I felt quite badly about it, so I went and bought her a pair of barrettes, or, you know, the little clips for your hair from the drugstore. They cost $5, and I brought it in, and it was her birthday the day after we met the next time. So I gave them to her and said, this is a birthday present, happy birthday. And the next day, her father was up at school, furious with the school, because her family are Jehovah's Witnesses, and they do not celebrate birthdays, and he felt that the school and the mentoring program and the mentor had deliberately disregarded his family's values and explicit instructions about not to celebrate her birthday. The mentor didn't know anything about it and was quite surprised and really felt like she had let the program down in doing this. She hadn't meant badly, but she just did. So then I continued on asking what surprised everybody, and the last person who brought up a story was a little girl who said that her mother had died, and she was very sad. She missed her. And the mentor said, again, I know you told me not to talk about religion, but I said in my religion I believe that we will see the people we love again, but even if you don't, you can keep a memory of your mother in your heart. And the little girl said, oh, no, my grandmother said that I'm not going to see my mother again because she won't go to heaven. She deserves to go to hell because the mother was murdered. So I bring this story up because, one, it's a true story, and two, if you remember when I started that training, I asked them, do you have any challenges? And I would say those issues that those people brought forward were pretty substantial challenges for any mentor to try to navigate. None of them had talked to the school coordinator about the issue with their children. And even when I asked them flat out, do you have any challenges, they sort of shrugged and said, no, everything was fine. So and you as a coordinator, how are you going to help people if they don't tell you some of these challenges, which are really, if you think about it, a challenge for anybody, let alone a volunteer mentor to be able to navigate. So we need to remember, as we provide support to matches, a couple of key things about it. So in my example, when I said, how's everything going, and they all said fine, mentors are not necessarily going to share their problems right away. There could be a lot going on under the surface. They could be not sure if they're supposed to share, where's the confidentiality, what should I be doing. Maybe it reflects badly on me as a mentor that the student is feeling this way. Many mentors assume that if there is an issue, that something's going wrong, it's the mentor's fault. Maybe I'm not a good mentor, when in fact the issue could have nothing to do with them and might be beyond their capability to handle. So helping them articulate what's going on gives the coordinator a chance to help look at it realistically. In my session with these 12 mentors, they all got to see that these were really challenging situations. And one of the things that really happened in that session was hearing each other's challenges, validated their own experiences, let them see, wow, sometimes I think I'm having a hard time. That's really hard. And they could also say to each other, it sounded like you handled that in the best way possible. Who would know what to say to someone like that? And to stop and think about, how can I get to the crux of what's going on for a mentor with all these challenging circumstances? I will tell you, at the end of the session, some of the other mentors wanted to find out where that grandmother lived who told the little girl that her mother deserved to die. I think there was going to be a vigilante posse to drive to that grandmother's house and straighten her out, but luckily they never found out where she lived. But I tell you this to remind you that you can't send a short email and say, how's everything going, and expect to get to the depth of what some of the things they're experiencing are. Okay? So next slide, please.
So just like Jean said, the questions you ask are incredibly important in terms of ascertaining the types of responses that are actionable that you can actually provide support around. It's also important to consider how you structure the methods of match support in your program, and it doesn't have to be the same strategy every time. So it could be a phone call in October and November, you talk to them in person at a holiday party in December, and there are different things that you may learn from those interactions when you change your strategies from, a phone call to an in-person touch point to an email or text message, which Jean is going to talk about in a few minutes. With site-based mentoring, you can also collect a ton of information as your mentors and students are putting on their coats and leaving for the day. You can really get some useful information in those last 5 minutes of your interactions. But it's also important to note that you find time to touch base with mentors privately. Sometimes they might disclose issues that they're having if they're chatting with you in a private setting instead of, as they're entering or exiting the program because, the youth are present. Another thing to note is that engaging with youth in person and talking to them directly and really observing their interactions with mentors will help you provide better support to both the mentor and mentee to, again, reframe some challenges. As a reminder, don't wait until you see mentors at an event to touch base with them. Really be intentional about the support that you provide. Make sure they're aware from the very beginning of the mentoring relationship how frequently you expect to communicate with them, to check in with them so that they understand how important it is that they respond to those phone calls or emails or schedule an in-person time to touch base with you. It's all about setting expectations at the very beginning so that they understand, what it is you will be providing, how frequently you'll be providing it, and what the expectation is on them to respond. And Jean, did you want to share about the text campaigns?
Absolutely, and I'm going to, in the interest of full disclosure, I was not a perfect mentor. even though I was with my young woman for 10 years. And I will tell you that I started with her in first grade, and when she was in fourth grade, she wanted to climb out the second floor window of the school, and I refused to let her do that. Ordinarily, I try not to be prescriptive, but that was a general rule. I didn't think climbing out the second floor window was a good idea, and so her response to that was to throw a tantrum on the floor, kicking and yelling. And I stood there, I remember thinking this, oh my God, I left work early and drove like a maniac to get here on time, and she's having a tantrum because I won't let her climb out the window and hurt herself. Why am I doing this? You understand, mentoring has been my career for 21 years. I love what I do. It's like my new religion. I really believe in it. And I tell you that because if I can be discouraged as a mentor, anybody can be discouraged as a mentor. I've seen thousands of children's lives change for the better. But that day, watching my mentee having a temper tantrum on the floor, I wanted to give up. And another mentor who's been with me alongside me with her mentee put her arm around my shoulders and said, don't forget how far she's come. You can look at her now and be discouraged, but don't forget. And I needed to hear that day. So it doesn't have to be complicated, but somebody ought to be able to say to a mentor, don't give up, okay? So one of the things we've tried to do in communicating with literally thousands of mentors, success mentors in the New York City schools, is we decided to communicate with them electronically. But it had to have a trick because many of them were teachers and staff who didn't sit at their computers all day long. And so we know that if you have a whole list of emails that have come in while you've been working, you don't necessarily open every one of them. But we do know that 92% of all text messages get read, and get read really within the first 20 minutes of when they're sent. So we decided to create text messages that gave a little bit of information, that were additional training, additional things to think about, and to send it out to mentors. It included a link that went back to our website that had a page with a little more information about whatever the topic was. But it was a way to push in a little bit of learning and encouragement into the everyday experience. For example, after Hurricane Sandy here in New York City, many schools were closed for a long time. Children and families, as well as mentors, were displaced. It was hard for them to get together, and mentors were frustrated because they couldn't solve some of the problems that the mentees faced. Sending text messages encourages them to show up, do the best they could, but not to expect to be able to solve electric problems, water problems, heating problems, but just to let the students know they were there for them, to access resources if possible. Those kinds of simple encouragements were hugely important in keeping the mentors connected in what was a really challenging time for all of us here struggling with that. It's particularly relevant now as we think about Harvey and Irma. Text messaging was pretty simple for us to set up. I think it cost us at the time 2 cents a text message. We set them up well in advance and then had the capability of adding something in when there was a natural disaster or something happening, but most of the time we set them up to 2 to 4 weeks in advance to be regularly scheduled, and it just kept learning and encouragement going out to the mentors in a pretty simple and straightforward way. We saw that there was a high percentage of people clicking through to the additional resources on our website, and it was just a little more encouragement and support for the mentors as they went forward. It is something that's passive, and it limits the amount of information because, in fact, we didn't get information back generally from them, so it was one way. So it's not necessarily the way you want to assume that you're getting feedback from the mentors, but it is another way to push out encouragement, support, and a little more information. There's a lot more information about specific benchmarks and how to monitor and support programs if you delve into the elements of effective practice for mentoring around those topics as well. Okay, so can we go to the next slide? Oh, we're there. Okay. So Whitney is going to be the coordinator, an experienced coordinator, and I am going to be a pretty new mentor.
All right.
All right. And I'm a mentor in a high school. I'm a paraprofessional, so I'm in the school every day, and I'm mentoring a 9th grade girl. And Whitney's asking me how it's going.
Hi, Jean. I just want to thank you again for, being a great mentor in our program, and I wanted to see how everything's going with your mentee. Are you touching base with her regularly?
Oh, absolutely. So once a week we try to have lunch together. We just take our sandwiches and eat in the classroom where I am.
Oh, that's great. That's very special. Are you enjoying those lunches together?
I am, and the other thing is most mornings, I don't know if she's supposed to do this or not, but most mornings she comes by my room and just waves to me and says hello. We don't talk very much, but I don't know if she's supposed to do that or not, but she does almost every morning wave to me and say hello. So.
Oh, I think that's great that she's stopping by and saying hello and making sure that she sees you each morning. Do you feel like you have a lot to talk about? Do you feel like you're connecting?
Well, we do talk about things, but here's where I just don't think I'm doing a very good job. We talk about what she wants to do when she finishes school, and every week she has a new career she wants to have. So she wants to be a teacher, and another week she wants to be a nurse, and then she says maybe she'll be a doctor, and I can't get her to sort of hone in on what's realistic and sort of stick to something, and I feel like I'm not doing a good job in getting her to think about that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It must be frustrating to, have her seemingly change her mind a lot, but I do think that she must really feel connected with you if she's stopping to see you every day in your classroom and even having lunch together one time a week in your classroom. I mean, I think you've clearly made a connection. And I also think it's great that she's talking to you about the future and kind of what she's thinking about doing. And it sounds like she's interested in the helping professions, which is similar to the role that, you play, which I think is kudos to you and the job that you're doing. And, I just want you to remember, Jean, she's only 14, and I think it's okay if she doesn't know what she wants right now. But I think it's great that she's sees you as a sounding board to vet some of those options around what she's thinking. And, maybe next time she suggests a certain career to you, you can start suggesting things that might be actionable that she can do around getting more information, maybe doing a job shadow. But I just want you to know you're doing a really great job, and, developing a relationship with her is your most important job, and it seems like you're doing a fantastic job of that. So I just want you to feel really good about that.
Oh, well, I've been thinking I'm supposed to get her to the end game, but you're saying I should just be concentrating on where we are today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear that you have a strong relationship and that you're meeting regularly. And if you have that strong relationship, she'll get where she needs to go, and you can be a help to her when she needs you, and she'll come to you for that support. But just focus on the relationship building, and the other pieces will fall into place. But I have to say, I'm really impressed with all that you're doing to support this young woman, and it sounds like, she's got a lot of great ideas for her future, and that you can maybe help her explore some of those options.
Okay. So I'll invite now for you to send any comments that you want to. I think we have a couple of minutes. If you want to send any comments about this match and the conversation that the coordinator had with the mentor, just address them to Delia or to everyone. I will tell you that's a true story as well. So just if there's anything you want to add, comments or suggestions, please go ahead and type them in. And while you're doing that, I'll say next slide, and let's talk about match support. So if you remember my story about that incredible training I did where they didn't have any problems and we came up with a few killer ones. So match support can take lots of different formats, and as Whitney mentioned, it's good to mix it up so that the person who may not open up in a group might open up if you catch them to speak for just a few minutes individually or vice versa. So use a variety of communication strategies. Discussion groups where mentors can learn from each other are also important. So the guy who doesn't talk much in that mentor support group is still paying attention to everything that everyone else is saying. Make sure that when you are talking about specifics, that you're doing it in that strengths-based language that you're going to model and in a non-threatening way. So Whitney could have said to me as a mentor, I can't believe you're being so silly to worry about that. She could have said that, right? And she didn't. She said, well, I understand that's frustrating, so she validated that's how I felt, but she tried to reframe it in the positive. So it was a great strategy of not making me feel diminished in any way, but encouraging me to move forward. One of the great things that you can do as a coordinator is to listen more than you talk. And again, that's where you're going to model for the mentors doing the best job possible, because we really want mentors to listen more than they spend time making pronouncements or giving advice. We want them to be listening to mentees and helping mentees find solutions that work for them, to guide them with open-ended questions and moving them forward. So if you listen more than you talk when you're working with mentors, you're actually modeling the behavior that you want them to continue to do. And to practice reframing, excuse me, reframing, as Whitney did with me, she reframed that discussion about careers to say, no, she hasn't decided yet, but she is only 14, and isn't it great? She's talking to you about all these things. That's amazing. That's really good. That's a different perspective of looking at the same situation. Whitney has a couple of other ideas of suggestions that she's going to suggest to you about match support.
So we have a program in Nebraska that started doing these, Jean mentioned mentor support groups, but I just wanted to flesh out the idea a little bit, where they convene their mentors monthly on a Saturday morning for coffee. The organization covered the cost of the coffee, and it was one of those things where mentors were invited to attend if they were available, but it was no commitment kind of a thing, and it was a very casual, relaxed atmosphere with the coordinator of the program also attending. And what that coordinator saw was that mentors were more willing to confide their issues in one another sometimes than the coordinator, because they felt hesitant to share their struggles and thought that maybe their struggles were silly, or that they should know how to navigate them and shouldn't have to lean on a coordinator for advice. Whereas when they were in an environment where they were with their peers who were also mentors to the same student group, that some great solutions and community was built. And so I always recommend this option as, again, an additional method of providing match support, not the only method of providing match support, because it's still very important to have those one-on-one interactions, either in person or on the phone, but just giving your mentors another avenue to explore the experiences that they've had with mentees. We focus a lot on mentees and their growth and development, which is obviously the purpose of mentoring relationships, but it's also important to note that many of these mentors find themselves in uncharted territories in terms of the issues that they face, or even the student population that they're working with, and so they need that support and just opportunity to troubleshoot their issues as well. And it is a low-cost and relatively light capacity load for programs to host some kind of a coffee meeting or whatever works for the structure of your program, but it's just a great way to, and to have some face-to-face time with your mentors as well. Here we go. So are there any questions either about the role play scenario or any of the other topics that we hit on today during the webinar? I don't know if there's a possibility to unmute the participants, or if you want to enter your questions into the chat box, either to Delia Hagen, mentor, or to everyone.
Yeah, Thanks, Whitney. And we do have some questions coming in, but definitely, Dantel, if you would like to unmute our participants so that folks can go ahead and just jump in, that's also okay. If you're more comfortable in the chat box, that's fine too. But yeah, I'll read off one of the questions that we did receive. So first one is, how can we encourage mentors who are struggling with their mentees? Another person gave like a specific example of a student who doesn't show up to the meetings, which is frustrating for the mentor, but you could also speak more broadly to just, how do you encourage your mentors?
I think in one of the first things you want to do is actually step back from the situation and take a look at what are the possible reasons why. Just like when we looked at what are the possible reasons friendships end, there could be 20 different reasons. What could be the different reasons that the student's not showing up? Is it a bad time? Does the student have to catch a bus home? In New York City, some of our students who are in homeless shelters travel 2 hours each way on 3 different buses or 2 buses on the subway. So what are the circumstances around which the mentee is supposed to be there? I had another school who used to put a sign up that said at-risk kids meeting in the library. And not surprisingly, many of the mentees didn't want to go to the meeting to meet their mentors. So, I mean, those are pretty blatant examples, but those are questions you want to step back and take a look at. What are some of the reasons that the mentor and mentee are not matching? Is the mentor harboring expectations that are misaligned with the program? We had one program where it was a friendship-based model. The mentor was asked to develop a relationship with a 10th grader, and he spent the time trying to tutor the young man to better. And so after a couple of visits, the mentee didn't want to come anymore. He didn't want to be coming for reading tutoring. He thought he was going to be interacting with a judge who was giving his time to get to know him. And he already had remediation time, and he was struggling with it. So what are the reasons why? Try to understand what is it that's keeping the student from appearing, and then try to see if there's a way to reframe it or to think about it. Not every match can be saved, obviously, but many of them, that if you go back to the reasons why friendships end, loss of trust, miscommunication, misplaced expectations, many of those things can be reversed and improved. But you got to get at the reason to do that. And once you've matched a child with a mentor, we really believe that to the extent possible, you want to keep that match going so that the youth doesn't see it as a failure on his part of one more thing he can't do right or one more thing she's not good at. I wasn't good at having a mentor. We want to try and make it work.
I also think, this is Whitney, I also think that this is why setting expectations at the beginning of a mentoring relationship is very important, and that mentors know, we like to phrase it as those, quote unquote, Kodak moments, and maybe that dates me a little bit, but that mentors aren't always going to have those Kodak moments that they maybe anticipate they will have in their relationships with young people, and that developing relationships and developing trust take time. There's going to be 2 webinars next week. They're geared towards mentors, but they may be beneficial for mentoring coordinators as well, talking about building relationships and then sort of mentoring tool and navigating struggles after you've built that relationship. So just making it clear to mentors from the very beginning that it's not an easy job, that there is a responsibility associated with it, that you're there to provide support as a coordinator and help them navigate these issues, but that, it's not going to be those Kodak moments that they maybe see in the magazine or anticipate mentoring to be, at least not at the beginning, but that they are capable and do have an opportunity to build a really meaningful relationship with a young person if they put in, the time necessary to build that relationship, just like any other relationship that they have.
And I think that's such a great point, Whitney. I mean, mentors volunteer because they want to help a child, but how they measure success is not going to be like a commercial. And when a coordinator says to the mentor, well, she never misses Tuesday, which is when you meet. She's here every Tuesday. She hasn't missed a Tuesday since the beginning of school. We think you're making an amazing connection with her. She may not be saying, thank you for being my mentor, but she's there every time. And when the coordinator points that out to a mentor right there, you're reframing what success looks like for that mentor. And they can go home truthfully feeling as if they are making progress. But they might not see that without your help.
Thank you so much, Whitney and Jean. I'm just quickly, I think we only have one more minute, but just wanted to see if anybody who is on the line who's been unmuted had a quick question that they wanted to ask the panelists. Okay. Yeah, and feel free to type your questions in if you wanted to ask them, and we can try to respond to you after the webinar if you have them. But I figured that we could, this is Delia Hagan. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Whitney and Jean for your amazing insights. You guys have such leadership and expertise in this area, so we're so lucky to have you, and just really want to thank you for sharing all of these recommendations and tips. And I also want to thank our participants as well. We hope this was helpful for you. I just wanted to share some of the resources that Whitney and Jean referenced and some of the things that informed this conversation. So you'll receive this slide deck after the fact, as well as access to the recording. But the text message curriculum that Jean mentioned is linked here. You'll be able to access the hyperlinks once you have the deck. And just some other tools that we collected for you that Whitney and Jean thought would be handy for you all to have. Some information and facts, and then just some other tools that you could actually use and download to use directly with your programs. We've got some match support outlines and feedback sheets and surveys that are just, really ready for you to adapt to your specific program if you're interested in doing that. So just wanted to highlight that for you. Here's just our references and some of the research that we talked about and some of the folks that created some of those resources I just showed you. Want to give them the credit they deserve. And then finally, as Whitney mentioned, we wanted to remind you about some webinars on the next slide. I'll talk more about that are coming up next week for mentors. But if you haven't already, we really want to encourage you to join the NSA ESC listserv. That's really where you're going to get the most up-to-date information about these resources that are available through the National Center, including some of the supports and the technical assistance that Mentor and our affiliates provide. There's also a great one-stop shop that's funded by the Department of Justice called the National Mentoring Resource Center, and it's really a great one-stop shop for mentoring resources and tools that are all no cost that you can use for your programs. So I encourage you to check that out. And then, of course, we've got Mentor New York and Midlands Mentoring Partnerships websites from our panelists, where their organizations, and then Mentor as well, that you can find more of the information that we were referencing today. And then finally, just want to put in a plug for you all to share this information with your mentors. I don't know how many of you already have recruited mentors for your Success Mentors or school-based mentoring program, but if you do have mentors that are ready to be matched or have been matched up with students, this would be a really good tool to leverage for them. These are basic mentor trainings geared towards school-based mentoring mentors, and so we wanted to offer these to you to just help onboard and train these guys in best practices and to start their relationships off right. And as Whitney mentioned, we have a 101 level training about building a strong relationship or the strong foundation for a success mentor relationship, and then a 201 level training for mentors about overcoming some common challenges that might arise. So wanted to offer you the registration link there. Once you receive the slides, you'll be able to access that and register. So it's not too late to share that info with your mentors. Just want to thank everyone so much, and I know, Dantel, I wanted to kick it over to you just to see if you had any other final reminders.
Yes, I also wanted to thank everyone for attending today. I hope you found the webinar helpful and informative. I wanted to remind you that the webinar recording will be emailed to you within 7 to 10 days, and also that every webinar recording from all of the Center's webinar series is available to you at our temporary website. The address is listed in the chat box right now. You can look and see that link. And please keep an eye out for our emails about our website, which will be live very soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.